Hey everyone, today I'm going to show you how to remove the oil pan on a Honda S2000. People typically remove their oil pans in order to install oil pan baffles or to replace their oil jet bolts. Anyway, let's get to it. The first thing you want to do is get the entire car on jack stands. You'll want the jack stands pretty high as you'll be spending some time completely underneath the car. In order to drop the oil pan, you'll need to remove the engine mount brace. Use a 14mm socket to remove the 4 bolts and 2 nuts securing the engine mount brace to the front subframe. Before you drop the oil pan, you'll need to drain the engine oil. Remove the oil fill cap in order to allow engine oil to flow out easier. Then use a 17mm socket and a ratchet to remove the oil drain plug. Drain the engine oil into the oil drain pan. Once the oil has finished draining, place a new crush washer onto the oil drain plug and then use a 17mm socket and a ratchet to reinstall the oil drain plug. Torque the oil drain plug to 29 foot-pounds. Another thing you'll need to unbolt is the AC compressor from the AC bracket. The AC compressor is attached to the AC bracket with 2 bolts, and it can be challenging to remove these bolts because there is no room for a ratchet. The only way I was able to remove these 2 bolts was by attaching a 14mm box and wrench to each of the bolts and then using a large rubber mallet to break them loose. Once they are broken loose, you should be able to hand loosen them and remove them. At the front of the oil pan, you're going to see a large rubber thing known as the engine stop. Simply pull at one of the sides of the engine stop, and that should unlock it from the subframe so that you can remove it. One of the last things you're going to have to remove is the 2 lower transmission bell housing bolts. The transmission bell housing doesn't provide a lot of clearance to work with these bolts. You'll need to use a 14mm socket with an extension or a 14mm wrench. I use a 14mm box and wrench and a large rubber mallet to break these bolts loose. Once the bolts are broken loose, you should be able to use a ratchet to finish removing them from the transmission bell housing. Now it's time to unbolt the oil pan from the engine block. There are 21 bolts that secure the oil pan to the engine block, and they run all around the oil pan. Use a 10mm socket and an extension and a ratchet to remove all the bolts securing the oil pan to the engine block. As you loosen the bolts, you may find that they won't drop out, and this is because there is some Honda bond attached to the end of the bolts. Don't worry if you can't pull out the bolts near the AC bracket, since you can finish removing them once the pan is removed from the car. Once you have completely loosened or removed all 21 oil pan bolts, you'll find that the oil pan will be stuck to the bottom of the engine block. There is likely some very old Honda bond holding the 2 together. In order to separate the oil pan from the engine block, you'll need to pry the 2 apart. There are areas on both the engine block and the oil pan specifically for this reason. I personally use a large flathead screwdriver to separate the oil pan from the engine block. Just be careful when working near the mating surface between the oil pan and the engine block. Support the oil pan and carefully lower it down to the ground once it has broken free from the engine block. If you found this video helpful, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment down below for any DIY you'd like to see in the future. Stay tuned for my next video where I show you how to reinstall the oil pan.